Greetings and welcome back to 303. We are in Senior English A, and we are now working with John Donne's maybe most famous poem, A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. I'm on page 484. Now, I've already given a lecture that posts on Learn Strong for this poem with some background information and the like. However, I'm just going to work with this poem in terms of a line-by-line reading. Let's just start at level 1 really quickly and make sure we get the title out of the way. If you finish high school with the top grades in your class, you are called the valedictorian. What does that mean? That means you are honored with the possibility of giving a big speech on graduation day. A valediction, I'm with you on page 484. Let's study the title quickly. A valediction simply means a statement. A statement. Do you see the colon after the word valediction? Right? In other words, I'm going to tell you what this statement is about. And then 2 words, forbidding mourning. Now let's work at it in reverse order. Notice, this is not mourning as in good morning, how are you doing? But rather mourning as in to be sad. And we know the word forbidding means don't do it. So let's just say it right away. And again, already at 3A, some of you are going to write down. This is very much going to be in the same vein as John Donne's poem, Song, right? In other words, I'm about to leave, I've got to go away, and I don't want you to be sad about that. Valediction, forbidding mourning. All right? The next thing we're going to point out about this poem, because it's going to end up on the exam, is take a look at the stanza development. Here, like song, there is intentionality. Do you see it? But notice the divisions here. We have stanzas of 4 lines. Do you see this? And notice rhyme scheme. I hope you're writing this down at 2B. Notice rhyme scheme. Away rhymes with say. Go rhymes with no. Noise rhymes with joys. Move with love. Do you see this? Okay. So in other words, we're working with an A, B, and then in the second stanza C, D, and on it goes. All right? Now let's take a look at this poem as a work of a great metaphysical poet. Let's define it to be the following observations. Metaphysical poets, 2 things. Let's write it down. 1, they like to work with difficult ideas, philosophic ideas, in their poetry to make you think. Number 2, they love the conceit, the extended word picture or metaphor. Okay? All these words mean the same thing. So as we get into this poem, we're going to pay attention to these word pictures. You'll remember back when we did the John Donne poem Song, there was that really interesting word picture about 2 lovers that are holding each other in bed, and then while they're asleep at night, they just simply roll to different parts of the bed. They're in the same bed, but they're separated in some way, right? They're still in love even though they're apart. That's a word picture that comes to mind and makes you go, wow, that's a really interesting way to think about love. We're going to see one of the most famous word pictures, all right, in our valediction forbidding mourning. Let's go ahead now and read the poem. And as we read each stanza, we will simply make some observations at level 1 in your notes. All right? Again, I've already given and posted on Learn Strong a full lecture on this poem. So I'm really doing this more as almost like a review for you. Let's go ahead and look at it. We begin right away with a simile, the word as, a comparison using like or as, remember? As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper to the souls to go, while some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now, and some say no. When we ask about virtuous, good person, bad person, virtuous, good person. In John Donne's day, you didn't die in a hospital. You died at home, in often the very bed that you had slept in all your life. As you got ready to die, people would come and they would sit around your bed and be there with you. Now, maybe you've heard old people say this before in your life. They're talking about somebody who's died, and instead of saying they died, they say what? They passed away. Are you familiar with this phrase? If somebody passes away, that means they're dying, okay, or they have died. So go back to the line. When it comes time for a really good person to die, to pass away, as virtuous men pass mildly away, and whisper to their souls to go. The virtuous person, the person who has lived a good life, wants to leave. In other words, he's like, yeah, it's time to go. I've lived a good life. Like we've said before, they taught you when you were at the park, you can't stay there forever. You got to go to the van sooner or later. They were already teaching you this concept of sooner or later, you have to die. You can't stay in this world forever. And a virtuous or a good man is ready to leave. While some of their sad friends do say, the breath goes now. And some say no. In other words, your pals, if you're a virtuous person, your pals don't want you to die. They don't want you to leave. And so they all lean in to listen if you're still breathing or not. And, oh, no more breath anymore. Oh, yes, I heard more breathing. He hasn't left yet. He hasn't passed away. But notice it's a simile. It starts with the word as. So now we got to go to the second stanza. So let us melt and make no noise, no tear floods, nor sigh tempests move, toward profanation of our joys, to tell the laity our love. Two observations. One, and this is going to sound very similar to John Donne's song, the poem that we looked at before. One, he says, when we go to the airport and I got to go away, let's not stand at the airport and blow snot all over each other and boo-hoo really loudly so everyone will look and say, oh, they must be so in love. No. He says, no. In the same way that a good man is ready to die and let his soul leave, and obviously his pals are quietly sitting around his bed saying, man, I hope he isn't dead yet. I don't think he's dead yet. He says, so let us melt. Make no noise, no snot blowing, no tear floods, nor sigh tempests move. We're not going to stand at the airport and blow snot all over each other to somehow try to prove to other people that we are in love with each other. And here's why. We have a different kind of relationship. We don't need public displays of affection to try to convince people we're in love. As a matter of fact, he even goes one step further and says, there's something wrong with public displays of affection like that, and here's why. He uses a religious observation, which makes sense because of his background. He uses a religious observation. In the church of his day, there are two groups. One, there is the clergy. Those are the people who are up front who run the show. They're the ones in the special garments and stuff like that, right? The other group is obviously the larger group. That's the laity, the people who come to church and sit out there. The laity lives their life and knows very little about what the clergy does. Why? Because the clergy is a very special kind of group of people. They have been formally trained. They know how to speak in a special language called Latin, blah, 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 blah. Right? Okay. John Donne says to his girl, when he gets ready to leave and she's really sad about him leaving, he says, hey, if our life is kind of like being in a church, we are the clergy. Everybody else in the world is the laity. And the clergy doesn't share everything with the laity. To share that would be a profanation. To profane means to ruin. Very simple then. He says, when we go to the airport, standing in front of total strangers and start blowing snot on each other because we're sad we're going to separate for a while because I got to go on this trip, it actually lessens our love in the minds of us. Everybody else would look and go, oh, they're so in love. Look, they're blowing snot all over each other because they don't want to leave or separate. And he goes, no. We have a different understanding. Our love is a more mature love. I would write that down. Our love is a more mature love. We do not need to have public displays of snot blowing to somehow prove to ourselves or to other people that we really are in love. We don't need it. There's no point in it. As a matter of fact, those kind of public displays might actually lessen the very thing that we hold so sacred, our love. Look at the third stanza. Moving of the earth brings harms and fears. Moving of the earth? Write it in your notes if you think you can figure that one out. What brings harms and fears? Moving of the earth? Let's write it down. Earthquakes. In other words, earthquakes can jack with people's lives. Look at the next stanza. Men reckon what it did and meant. In other words, every time there's an earthquake, the first question is, why? Why did this have to happen? Terrible, scary, everything starts moving. For those of us that have ever been through an earthquake or lived in a place where there's earthquakes, had the effects of those earthquakes, we know that it's totally freaky. It jacks with you on all levels, right? The idea here that he's going to make is there are certain things that happen in nature that cannot be explained. Look at the next lines. But trepidation, fear of the spheres, look at your footnote there, movements of the stars and planets that are inconsistent with the perfect circular orbit, right? But trepidation of the fears, though greater far, is innocent. In other words, there are things that must happen, and there's no reason to stand around and ask why. It is beyond our comprehension. It is beyond our understanding. So let's not beat ourselves up because we don't understand it. Jot down in your notes at level 1, what does this have to do with going on a trip? What is he saying to her about going on a trip? And all of a sudden, it becomes fairly self-evident, right? Oh, I get it. What he's saying to her is, I don't have a choice. I have to go on this trip. I have to go away. And in the same way that you shouldn't stand around and wonder about earthquakes because there's nothing to be gained by it, there's nothing to be gained by being sad about my having to leave. Again, this will sound very similar to the ideas that he presented in song. The only difference here for us is that we might point out this is a little more sophisticated way of saying it. Now let's take a look at the next one. Dull, sublunary lover's love, whose soul is sense, cannot admit absence, because it doth remove those things which elemented it. Now let's make sure we understand here, and I said this in an earlier lecture, and you can go back and watch that lecture in more detail. This is that idea, that very Platonist idea, that there's actually two worlds. There's the world of the physical realm, the world of senses, the world of tables and chairs, the things you can see, the things you can touch, etc., etc. Then there is another world. That's the world of concepts or ideas. It's a different kind of world entirely, right? For example, I think said in an earlier lecture on this topic, you can, for example, talk about the exchange of fluids, but that's not the same thing as love. Any senior knows this. Sex and love, not the same thing. Something quite different, right? What is love? Well, love is kind of a concept, right? Love is kind of a concept. The argument that he's going to make here is a fascinating one. He's going to say there are two ways to love. One is not actually love, it's lust. That is to say, to love the body. The other is to love the mind. If you love the body and the body is gone, then you have nothing to love, because the body is gone. If you love the mind, however, then there is no such thing as connecting physically to the mind. Therefore, you can continue to be in love even when the body is not there. People who are dull-witted, dull, sublunary lovers love, put all of their emphasis on sense, the body itself. And therefore, they cannot admit absence. They don't want to be gone from the very thing that makes up their relationship. This is a fascinating argument. It says, if you are in love with the body and the body has to leave, you can no longer have love. The love is ended, because the only thing that you love is the body. On the other hand, if you are in love with the mind, and here we could jump down to 3a really quickly. Remember Shakespeare's sonnet 116, let me not to the marriage of true, not bodies, but what? Minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when alteration finds. In other words, there's another kind of love. It's the marriage of minds. It's the joining of minds. Minds are different. In the same way, now he's going to use an interesting word picture. Minds are like gold. Now think about this word picture for a moment. You take a ball of gold and you put it inside of a pan and you start heating it up. You have a small child watching, and the child watches the gold as the pan gets hotter. What happens to the ball of gold? It starts to melt and it becomes flat like a pancake. Agreed? A child would look at that and say, uh-oh, the gold has gone away. But you as a mature adult would say, no, no, no. It's the exact same amount of gold. It's just in a different form, a different shape. It's just flattened out. Take a look at how he says it. Last lines on 484. But we, by a love so much refined, that ourselves know not what it is, enter assuaged of the mind, top of page 485. Care less, eyes, lips, hands to miss. In other words, because we are in love with the mind and not the body, we don't care about eyes and lips and hands. In other words, let's put it in your notes at level 1. I have to go away. My body, however, goes away, not my mind. My mind will remain always with you and you with my mind. And because we are in love with each other's minds and not just each other's bodies, I can go away for a while and it is not that big of a deal. He then turns to this notion of souls. We've mentioned this already from Platos Symposium. You can write that down in 3a. That dialogue where the argument is made, that Greek myth, that at conception, the soul is actually a perfect sphere, is cut in half. Half of the soul goes into your body. Half of the soul goes into your soulmate's body. And when you finally meet, it's like two magnets that come together, right? Interesting thing about magnets, if you reverse their polarity, what happens when you try and put them together? They actually repel. This is an interesting word picture for the Greeks because it explains why some relationships don't work out. So, for example, you work really, really hard to try and make this relationship work out, and the Greeks will say, well, yeah, but you can hold magnets together for so long. But then the minute you let go, what happens to the two magnets if they're not together? Bing, they go the opposite direction. In other words, what's meant to be is meant to be. Soulmates. The argument he's going to make is we're a very special kind of relationship because we're soulmates. He says it this way: our two souls, therefore, which are one. Though I must go, endure not yet a breach, a breaking, but an expansion like gold to airy thinness be. In other words, put a ball of gold inside of a pan and heat it up. Children, immature, dull, sublunary lovers love. Immature people would say about the gold, uh-oh, it's going away. No, no, no. It's not going away. Still have the same love. It's just of a different form. My leaving you does not alter at all, he says, our love. And here's why. We're not in love with each other's bodies. We're in love with each other's minds. And where is the mind? Can you touch it? Can you taste it? Of course, you might try to suggest, well, the brain. No, no, no. Is the brain your mind? Where is your mind? Well, no, 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 you don't understand. The mind doesn't actually exist. It is a metaphysical concept. And yet, very important in the relationship between Donne and his girl. Why? Because he says if you only love the body, and the body goes away, on a trip or whatever, you have nothing to love. Of course you're going to be sad, because the body, the only thing you love, is gone. But if you love the mind can't go away. The mind is ever present. And therefore, it's like gold that starts out as a ball and then when heated or refined, it becomes flat. Still the same gold. The final word picture is even more compelling. The final word picture is the reason why on page 484, they have that little compass there. Are you guys familiar with this? Now, this is awesome. This is when mathematics and poetics meet. It's kind of a fun word picture. Notice that you have two legs to that compass. How does a compass work? They put the picture there for you to remind you of what you learned in math class. How does a compass work? One leg of the compass has to stay in its place, correct? What does the other leg of the compass do? It has to separate, spread, and go out to make the circle, correct? Imagine for a moment if the two legs of the compass could talk. Imagine for a moment if the one leg of the compass that's got to stay in the place is his girl. And as the other leg of the compass gets ready to leave and separate to go out to make the circle, she started yelling at it and saying, don't go, don't go, don't go. What if the other leg of the compass would say, no, 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 you don't understand. To make a perfect circle, I have to leave. I have to separate from you so that I can then make that circle. But once the circle has been made, the compass will be picked back up the two legs will be reunited and laid on the desk or in the drawer. In other words, I'll only be gone for a few moments. Watch how poetically he says this to his girl. If they, our souls, be two, they are two so as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect as that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me, who must like the other foot obliquely run. Thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun. In other words, he says, look at the compass on page 484. Question, is it 2 or 1? What an interesting question. Look at the drawing. Is it 2 or 1? Well, of course, there are 2 legs to that compass, so it's 2. Not if you understand what a compass is for. Why? Because a compass is for the making of a circle, which requires 2 to be 1. Look at the picture. Requires 2 to be 1. The only way that instrument works is for the 2 legs to separate and to go on a trip. But one has to stay in its place so that the other can make the trip. In other words, he says to his girl, the only way that I can go on this trip and come back is for you to stay here. You ground me in some way. Let's write that down. It's a fascinating word picture. You ground me. While I am away, I don't have to worry because I know where you are. And I don't have to worry about you. And because I don't have to worry about you, I can take care of the work I have to do, and then I'll be back home.